The alarm shrieked through the corridors of Nexus Station like a wounded animal. Ambassador's 4 eyes widened in terror as the automated voice repeated the same horrifying message that had already sent 3 security teams into full panic mode. Code Red, all juvenile SBCIMENS missing from Sector 7. Repeat, all cubs are unaccounted FOR. Chitinous exoskeleton clicked nervously as he scuttled down the main corridor, his 6 legs carrying him faster than dignity would normally allow. Behind him, a trail of worried alien diplomats followed in various states of distress. The cubs were not just any children. They were the offspring of the most powerful military leaders in 3 galaxies, here for the historic peace summit that had taken months to arrange. How does an entire nursery of cubs just vanish? Wheezed Ambassador Grex through his breathing apparatus, his translucent blue skin pulsing with anxiety. The security on this station is supposed to be impenetrable. Security Chief, a towering reptilian with scales that shifted from green to angry red when stressed, was barking orders into his communicator. I want every inch of this station searched. Check the air vents, the maintenance shafts, the waste disposal units, everywhere. Those cubs couldn't have just disappeared. The search had been going on for 3 hours. 3 terrifying hours during which the most dangerous beings in known space had watched their precious offspring vanish without a trace. The cubs were small, no bigger than Earth, but they were incredibly important to their species. Losing them would mean the end of the peace negotiations and quite possibly the start of the most devastating war the galaxy had ever seen. Dr. Sarah, the only human on the diplomatic team, tried to keep pace with the much larger aliens as they stormed through the station. She had been studying xenobiology for 15 years, but she had never seen anything like the panic that was spreading through the diplomatic quarters. The adults were beginning to emit a low humming sound that made the metal walls vibrate, a sign that their usually controlled emotions were reaching dangerous levels. Ambassador, Sarah called out, slightly breathless from trying to keep up with his rapid movement. When exactly were the cubs last seen? The ambassador's antennae twitched as he accessed his memory files. Exactly 4.7 hours ago, during their scheduled rest period, the nursery guards reported all 23 cubs were accounted for and settling down for sleep. When the next shift arrived for the evening count, every single one was gone. And there were no signs of struggle, no damage to the nursery facilities. None whatsoever. It is as if they simply evaporated. Doctor frowned. In her experience with alien species, young creatures rarely just vanished. There had to be an explanation, something the security teams were missing. She thought about what she knew of cubs. They were naturally curious, pack-oriented, and had an incredible ability to squeeze through spaces much smaller than their bodies would suggest. Chief, she called out to the security leader who was coordinating the search from his mobile command station. Have your teams check the human quarters. The reptilian's head snapped around, his yellow eyes narrowing. The human quarters? Why would we search there? Humans had nothing to do with this disappearance. It's not about blame, Sarah explained patiently. It's about behavior. If the cubs were exploring and got lost, they might have been attracted to something specific. Different species give off different pheromones, different sounds. Maybe something in the human section caught their attention. Ambassador's exoskeleton clicked more rapidly. Doctor raises an interesting point. Cubs are indeed drawn to new sensory experiences, if there was something unique about the human living areas. Chief looked skeptical but nodded curtly. Fine, Team 7 redirect to the human residential section, but make it quick, we're running out of places to look. The human quarters were located in a quieter section of the station, designed to accommodate the smaller size and different atmospheric needs of Earth's representatives. As the search team approached, Doctor noticed something odd. The area was completely silent. Normally, you could hear the low hum of environmental systems, the occasional footstep or conversation. But now there was nothing. That's strange, she murmured to herself, then spoke louder. Usually there's at least some activity in this area. It's almost like everyone's asleep, but it's only mid-afternoon by station time. Team 7, led by a militant-looking warrior named Captain, spread out to search the individual quarters. Doctor followed them, her scientific curiosity overriding any concern about protocol. They checked the first few rooms quickly. Dr. Martinez from the Cultural Exchange Program, engineer from the Technical Liaison Team, Ambassador Williams from Earth's political delegation. All empty, all normal. It was when they reached the quarters of Lieutenant James, Bear Harrison, the human military advisor, that they heard it. A soft, rhythmic breathing sound, not just one pattern but many, overlapping in a gentle symphony of peaceful sleep. Captain held up one scaled hand, signaling for silence. He gestured toward the door, which was slightly ajar, unusual for residential quarters, which typically sealed automatically for privacy and security. Doctor stepped forward carefully and peered through the gap. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. The room had been transformed into something that looked nothing like military quarters and everything like the most comfortable nursery imaginable. The standard-issue furniture had been pushed to the sides, and the floor was covered with every soft item Lieutenant Harrison could apparently find: blankets, pillows, clothing, towels. It created a soft, warm nest that took up most of the available space. And curled up in this improvised paradise, sleeping more peacefully than she had ever seen any creature sleep, were all 23 missing cubs. But they weren't alone. Lieutenant Harrison himself was in the center of the pile, flat on his back with his arms spread wide. Cubs were draped across his chest, curled against his sides, nestled in the crooks of his arms. Several had claimed his legs as pillows. A few particularly bold ones had even made themselves comfortable on his head, their tiny forms rising and falling with his steady breathing. The sight was so unexpected, so completely contrary to everything the panicked security teams had been imagining, that for a moment nobody moved. Here was this large human soldier, a man trained for combat and strategy, serving as an apparently willing bed for 24 alien children who looked utterly content to be exactly where they were. "Found them," Captain whispered into his communicator, his voice carrying a note of disbelief that even his training couldn't suppress. Doctor couldn't help but smile. She pulled out her personal recording device and captured the scene, knowing that without evidence, no one would believe what they were seeing. Lieutenant Harrison's face was completely relaxed, and every few moments one of the cubs would shift position slightly, causing a ripple effect as the others adjusted to maintain the perfect sleeping arrangement. "Should we wake them?" asked one of the junior security officers, a young pelican whose purple feathers were ruffled with confusion. "Absolutely not," Doctor said quickly. "Look at them. When did you last see cubs sleep this deeply? They're not just resting, they're completely at peace. And Lieutenant Harrison," she trailed off, studying the human's face, "he looks more relaxed than I've seen him since we arrived at the station." The word was already spreading through the communication channels. The urgent, panicked chatter of the search teams was rapidly transforming into confused murmurs as the news traveled back to the main group. Ambassador himself was reportedly rushing toward the human quarters, along with several other high-ranking officials, and what sounded like half the station's security force. "This is highly irregular," Captain muttered, but even he seemed reluctant to disturb the peaceful scene. "Protocol dictates that we should immediately separate the cubs from unauthorized personnel and return them to secure containment." "Unauthorized personnel?" Doctor raised an eyebrow. "Captain, I don't think those cubs consider Lieutenant Harrison unauthorized. Look at their body language. They're completely relaxed. Their breathing is deep and even, and they've positioned themselves in a classic pack formation with him as the alpha protector in the center. This isn't a kidnapping or an accident. This is voluntary behavior." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor, lots of footsteps, moving quickly. Doctor realized that in about 30 seconds, this quiet, peaceful scene was about to be disrupted by a crowd of very worried, very loud alien diplomats. She made a quick decision. "Captain, could you have your team set up a perimeter in the corridor? When the ambassadors arrive, I think it would be better if only a few of them entered at first. We don't want to startle the cubs awake suddenly." The warrior considered this, then nodded. "Agreed. Sudden awakening could cause panic among the juveniles. Team 7, establish a viewing perimeter. No more than 2 individuals in the doorway at any time." Just in time. The rapid clicking of Ambassador's approach was already audible, accompanied by what sounded like several other sets of feet, claws, and appendages. "Where are they? Are my cubs safe? I demand to see them immediately." His voice carried all the authority of a species that had once conquered half a galaxy. Doctor stepped into the corridor to meet him. "Ambassador, they're perfectly safe, but I need to ask you to approach very quietly. They're sleeping, and I think what you're about to see might surprise you." The 4 eyes fixed on her with laser intensity. "Sleeping? Where? How?" "See for yourself," she said, stepping aside to allow him a clear view through the doorway. Ambassador moved forward, his usual confident scuttle reduced to the most careful steps Doctor had ever seen him take. He reached the doorway, peered inside, and stopped so suddenly that Ambassador Grex, who had been right behind him, bumped into his chitinous back plate. By the 7 moons of breathed, his translator barely managing to convey the wonder in his voice. Doctor watched his face, or what she could read of it through his alien features. The panic and fear that had been radiating from him for hours was melting away, replaced by something that looked remarkably like peace. "How long have they been like this?" he asked, his voice soft enough that it wouldn't disturb the sleepers. "We just found them a few minutes ago," Doctor replied. "But from the way they're settled, I'd guess they've been sleeping here for at least an hour, maybe longer." Ambassador Grex had managed to get a look as well, and his translucent skin was now cycling through colors Doctor had never seen before, a shifting pattern of blue and gold that seemed to indicate deep amazement. "In 30 years of diplomacy," Grex murmured, "I have never seen cubs sleep with such trust." Other ambassadors were gathering behind them, but Captain was efficiently managing the crowd, allowing only quick glimpses before moving them along. Doctor could hear the confused whispers in a dozen alien languages as word spread of what had been discovered. "Doctor," Ambassador said, still gazing at the sleeping pile, "you study behavior. What do you make of this?" She considered her words carefully. This was clearly a moment of significant importance, not just for the immediate crisis, but potentially for the entire diplomatic process. "Ambassador, what I'm seeing here challenges some fundamental assumptions we might have about human-alien interactions. Your cubs didn't wander here by accident. They made a deliberate choice to seek out Lieutenant Harrison's quarters, and they chose to stay. More importantly, they chose to sleep, the most vulnerable state any creature can be in the presence of an alien species. And the human, this Lieutenant Harrison." Doctor smiled. "Look at his face. He's not just tolerating this situation, he's embracing it. Literally. Those cubs have turned him into their designated sleeping partner, and he's not only allowing it, he's actively participating in making them comfortable." As if summoned by their conversation, one of the smallest cubs, barely the size of a kitten, stretched in its sleep, and let out a tiny, contented sound that was picked up by Lieutenant Harrison's still sleeping form. Without waking, the human's hand moved slightly to gently stroke the cub's back, and the small creature settled even deeper into sleep. The gesture was so natural, so instinctive, that it left the watching ambassadors speechless. "Remarkable," whispered Ambassador. "It appears that nurturing behavior is not only possible, but instinctive under the right circumstances." Doctor nodded. "The question now is, what do we do about it?" The debate that followed was unlike anything Doctor had witnessed in her years of diplomatic service. What should have been a simple matter of retrieving missing children and returning them to their designated quarters had become a complex philosophical discussion about the nature of trust, the rights of juvenile sentience, and the protocols for unprecedented situations. The gathering had moved to Conference Room Alpha, where representatives from a dozen species sat around the massive circular table that had been designed to accommodate the diverse body types and communication methods of the galactic community. Through the transparent aluminum walls, they could see the corridor leading to the human quarters, where Lieutenant Harrison and the cubs continued their peaceful sleep under the discreet supervision of a minimal security detail. "The situation is clear," declared General, the senior military representative and father to 3 of the sleeping cubs. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to having his orders followed without question. "The juveniles must be returned to the secure nursery immediately. Every moment they remain in unauthorized quarters increases the security risk." Doctor had been quietly observing the discussion, but this statement prompted her to speak up. "General, with respect, what security risk? Your cubs have been missing for over 4 hours. During that time, they've been completely safe, well-rested, and apparently happier than they've been since arriving at the station. If anything, this situation has revealed a significant gap in our understanding of their needs." The general's scaled head turned toward her, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "Their needs are irrelevant. Security protocols exist for a reason, human. Your species may be new to galactic politics, but surely you understand the importance of following established procedures." "Actually," interrupted Ambassador, his chitinous form clicking thoughtfully, "I believe Doctor raises a point worth considering. In the past 72 hours since our arrival, the cubs have exhibited signs of stress that our medical team attributed to the unfamiliar environment. Sleep disturbances, reduced appetite, increased aggressive play behavior. Yet in the past 4 hours, he activated a holographic display showing recent biometric data from the cubs' monitoring devices. Their stress hormones have dropped to the lowest levels we've recorded since leaving our home system. Heart rates are optimal, brain activity suggests deep, restorative sleep cycles, and their immune system markers are actually improving. Commander Vex of the Hegemony Defense Corps, a species known for their rigid adherence to protocol, studied the data with interest. These readings are indeed unusual, but correlation does not imply causation. The improvements could be due to other factors. What factors? Asked Doctor. The environmental conditions in Lieutenant Harrison's quarters are nearly identical to those in the nursery. The atmospheric composition is the same, the temperature is regulated to the same specifications, and the lighting follows the same circadian patterns we established for the cubs' comfort. The only variable that's different is the presence of a human. Ambassador Grex, whose translucent skin was now displaying a thoughtful pattern of green and silver, leaned forward. Doctor, from a perspective, what is your theory about why the cubs would seek out human contact? Doctor had been thinking about this question since discovering the sleeping pile. Based on my observations, I believe it comes down to a combination of factors that humans possess almost uniquely among the species represented here. First, humans are one of the few species that naturally regulate their body temperature in a way that creates a stable, warm environment. Second, human breathing patterns and heart rates fall within a specific range that many mammalian-adjacent species find soothing. It's similar to the sounds their own parents would make. She paused, organizing her thoughts. But I think the most important factor is behavioral. Humans have evolved as social nurturers. We have an instinctive response to care for young creatures, even across species lines. Lieutenant Harrison didn't plan this situation, but when the cubs appeared in his quarters, and they must have found a way in themselves, his natural response was to make them comfortable and safe. You're suggesting that humans are naturally suited to? General's tone was skeptical. I'm suggesting that humans have certain traits that make us uniquely compatible with a wide range of young alien species. The cubs recognized this at an instinctive level and sought it out. The room fell silent as the implications of this statement sank in. Finally, Minister of the Zenith Collective, an ancient species that served as mediators in most galactic disputes, spoke in a voice like wind through crystal formations. If Doctor's theory is correct, this could have significant ramifications for our understanding of cooperation. The ability to provide comfort and security to the young of other species is unprecedented in recorded galactic history. Unprecedented and potentially dangerous, General countered. We know nothing about the long-term effects of such exposure. What if the cubs become overly attached to human contact? What if this disrupts their normal development patterns? Doctor was about to respond when Captain's voice crackled through the communication system. Excuse the interruption, but we have a development in the human quarters. The subjects are beginning to wake up. Every head in the room turned toward the wall screens as Captain activated the visual feed from Lieutenant Harrison's quarters. The scene was much as they had left it, but now there were small stirrings of movement as first one. Then several of the cubs began to stretch and yawn in that universal gesture of creatures waking from deep sleep. Lieutenant Harrison's eyes opened slowly, and for a moment his face showed the confusion of someone waking up in an unexpected situation. Then, as awareness returned, his expression shifted to something Doctor could only describe as gentle amusement. "Well, good morning, little ones." His voice came through the audio feed, soft and warm. "Have a good nap." The cubs responded with a series of chirps, clicks, and small movements that were clearly communications, even though the translation systems couldn't interpret them. Several of the watching ambassadors leaned forward, their own expressions showing surprise. Are they trying to communicate with him?" asked Ambassador Grex. "It appears so," replied, his 4 eyes fixed on the screen. "Those are pre-language vocalizations. Cubs use them with trusted adults before they develop full speech capabilities." On the screen, Lieutenant Harrison was carefully sitting up, moving slowly to avoid disturbing the cubs who were still nestled against him. As he shifted position, Several of them climbed up to higher positions on his shoulders and arms, while others remained contentedly curled against his torso. "Easy there, guys," he was saying, his voice maintaining that same gentle tone. "Let's see if we can get you back to your folks without anyone falling off." But as he started to stand, something unexpected happened. The cubs began to emit a high-pitched distress call, not the communications chirps from before, but clear signals of alarm and unhappiness. "They don't want to leave," Doctor observed, watching as several cubs clung more tightly to Lieutenant Harrison's uniform. "Look at their body language, ears back, tails tucked, stressed postures. The idea of separation is causing them immediate anxiety." Lieutenant Harrison seemed to recognize the distress signals as well. He settled back down, and immediately the cubs calmed, resuming their comfortable positions around him. "It's okay," he was saying, though Doctor wasn't sure if he was talking to the cubs or to himself. "We'll figure this out." General stood abruptly. "This is unacceptable. The longer this continues, the stronger the attachment will become. I'm ordering an immediate extraction." "Wait," the voice belonged to Elder, the most senior representative and General's own superior. The ancient being had been silent throughout the discussion, but now his attention was fully focused on the screen. "Look at your own offspring." Doctor followed his gaze to the screen, where 3 slightly larger cubs were positioned closest to Lieutenant Harrison's chest, the General's own children. They weren't just comfortable. They appeared to be actively protective of their position, forming a small barrier between the human and the other cubs. "They've bonded with him," Elder continued, his voice carrying centuries of wisdom. "Not just casual comfort, but genuine emotional attachment. Forcible separation could cause psychological trauma that might persist for years." "Then what do you suggest?" General's voice had lost some of its commanding certainty. Minister's crystalline form chimed softly, the equivalent of clearing his throat. "If I may suggest a compromise, rather than immediate extraction, perhaps we could arrange a controlled transition. Allow the cubs to maintain contact with Lieutenant Harrison while gradually reintroducing them to their normal environment." "That's not protocol," Commander Vex objected. "We don't have procedures for this type of situation." "Because this type of situation has never occurred before," Doctor pointed out. "The protocols were designed for normal circumstances. This is anything but normal." Ambassador was studying the data displays again. "The cubs' stress levels remain optimal. Their vital signs are actually better than they've been since we arrived at the station. From a purely medical standpoint, there's no immediate need to separate them." On the screen, Lieutenant Harrison was now engaged in what could only be described as play with several of the cubs. He was gently moving his hands in patterns that the cubs would chase and pounce on, their tiny claws harmlessly batting at his fingers. The sound of their laughter for it was clearly laughter, even across species lines filled the room. "Look at them," Doctor said softly. "When was the last time you saw cubs play with such joy? They're not just safe, they're happy, genuinely, deeply happy." Elder made a decision that would echo through galactic history. "We will try Minister's approach. The cubs may remain with Lieutenant Harrison for now, but under supervised conditions. We need to understand this phenomenon before we act to end it." General looked as if he wanted to argue, but even he couldn't deny what they were all seeing. His own children were more relaxed and content than they had been in months. "What about security concerns?" asked Captain through the communicator. "Lieutenant Harrison will move to the secure guest quarters adjacent to the nursery," Elder decided. "The cubs can have access to both environments, and we can monitor the situation closely. Doctor, I want you to lead a research team to document everything. If humans truly possess this gift for nurturing, it could change the entire dynamic of galactic cooperation." Doctor nodded, her mind already racing with the implications. "I'll need to interview Lieutenant Harrison, study the cubs' behavioral patterns, and document the physiological changes. We'll also need to consider how this might apply to other species young." "One step at a time," Elder cautioned. "First, let's see how this unique situation develops." As if sensing the decision that had been made, Lieutenant Harrison looked up toward the security camera, somehow knowing that important people were watching. Command, I'm not sure exactly what happened here, but these little guys seem to have adopted me. I'm happy to help however I can, but I'm going to need some guidance on proper care and feeding procedures." The sound of laughter filled Conference Room Alpha, not human laughter, but the complex harmonics of a dozen alien species expressing amusement and approval simultaneously. It was a sound that hadn't been heard in the halls of galactic diplomacy for decades. "I believe," said Minister, his crystalline form resonating with warm tones, "that Lieutenant Harrison is about to become the most important human in the galaxy." 3 weeks had passed since what station personnel had begun calling the Great Cub Migration, and Nexus Station had been transformed in ways nobody could have predicted. What had started as a diplomatic crisis had evolved into something that was reshaping the fundamental understanding of relationships throughout the galaxy. Doctor stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed nursery complex, watching through reinforced transparent aluminum as Lieutenant Harrison conducted what had become his daily, Cub Circle time. The facility had been built in record time, combining human ergonomic design with advanced alien technology to create a space that could accommodate multiple species' needs simultaneously. In the center of the main playroom, Harrison sat cross-legged on a soft mat, surrounded by not just the original 23 cubs, but also a growing collection of young beings from other species. Word had spread quickly through the galactic diplomatic corps about the humans' unusual gift, and curious ambassadors had begun requesting that their own offspring be allowed to participate in what scientists were calling the Harrison Protocol. Subject exhibits continued positive interaction patterns with all juvenile specimens, Doctor dictated to a recording device. Day 21 of observation shows no decline in effectiveness across species barriers. If anything, Lieutenant Harrison appears to be developing an intuitive understanding of each species' specific needs and communication methods. She watched as Harrison carefully adjusted his position to allow a young crystalline to nestle against his shoulder, while simultaneously keeping his hands free to sign basic concepts to a deaf hegemony youngling. Nearby, 3 cubs were engaged in an elaborate game that seemed to involve Harrison's feet as mobile obstacles to climb over and around. The sight would have been impossible to believe just a month ago. The crystallines were notoriously protective of their young, never allowing them contact with other species until they reached their adult phase. The hegemony had strict cultural prohibitions against physical contact between their children and aliens. Yet here they were, all species mingling freely under the calm supervision of a single human soldier who had somehow become the galaxy's most trusted babysitter. Ambassador approached the observation window, his chitinous form clicking with what Doctor had learned to recognize as contentment. "Doctor, the daily reports continue to show remarkable results. The cub's development in all areas, physical, cognitive, and social, has accelerated beyond anything in our historical records." "It's not just the cubs," Doctor replied, indicating the data pad in her hands. "Lieutenant Harrison himself is showing interesting changes. His stress levels have dropped significantly, his sleep patterns have improved, and his overall psychological profile indicates a level of job satisfaction that's off our standard charts." Through the window, they watched as Harrison responded to what appeared to be a minor dispute between a cub and a young pelican. Rather than separate them, he seemed to be facilitating some kind of communication between the two, using a combination of gestures, sounds, and what looked like improvised sign language. "How does he know to do that?" wondered aloud. "No human has ever been trained in juvenile conflict resolution." Doctor had been studying this phenomenon for weeks and was beginning to understand. "I think it's because he's not overthinking it. Most adults, when faced with children from an alien species, become paralyzed by the fear of doing something wrong. They focus on the differences, the potential dangers, the cultural complexities. But Harrison approaches each situation as if all children have certain universal needs: comfort, safety, attention, and gentle guidance. And he appears to be correct in that assumption. More than correct. He's proving that the fundamental nature of childhood might be one of the few truly universal constants in the galaxy. The proof of this was evident throughout the complex. The facility now housed young beings from 18 different species, all of whom had adapted to what the staff called Harrison Standard Care. This included regular sleep periods in communal pile formations, interactive play sessions that accommodated various physical capabilities, and feeding times that had become social events rather than mere nutrition delivery. The impact extended far beyond. The success of the nursery had led to breakthrough discussions in the adult diplomatic sessions. Species that had been deadlocked on trade agreements for decades were suddenly finding common ground by observing how easily their children cooperated with guidance from someone who treated them all with the same patient kindness. "Doctor," came a voice from the communication panel, "you're needed in conference room beta, priority meeting." She exchanged glances with Ambassador. "That's the secure conference room. Whatever this is about, it's significant." When they arrived, they found the room filled with the highest-ranking officials from every species represented at the station. Elder presided from his position at the head of the table, while representatives from the Galactic Council appeared via quantum-encrypted hologram. "Dr. Elder began, your research into Lieutenant Harrison's abilities has been closely monitored by the Council. We need to discuss the implications of your findings." Prime Vex, the ancient leader of the hegemony, materialized in sharp detail through the hologram. "Doctor, your reports suggest that humans possess an innate capacity for nurturing that is unprecedented in galactic history. Is this assessment accurate?" Doctor chose her words carefully. "Prime, based on my observations and extensive testing, humans do appear to have certain traits that make them uniquely suited for cross-species. However, I want to emphasize that Lieutenant Harrison may represent the best possible example of these traits, not necessarily the standard. Explain the implications if these traits are common among humans." Doctor activated a holographic display showing her research data. If even a significant minority of humans share Lieutenant Harrison's natural abilities, it could revolutionize cooperation. The cubs in our facility aren't just comfortable with each other, they're actively learning from each other. Language acquisition has accelerated, social skills are developing at unprecedented rates, and they're creating new forms of play and communication that incorporate elements from all their species. She manipulated the display to show behavioral analysis charts. More importantly, the adult representatives are noticing changes in their own perspectives. Parents who have watched their children thrive in mixed-species environments are much more open to cooperation and compromise in diplomatic negotiations. Prime Vex leaned forward, his ancient features sharp with interest. "You're suggesting that human involvement could serve as a catalyst for broader cooperation." "I'm suggesting that children might be the key to peace that we've all been overlooking. When young beings are raised with the understanding that other species are potential friends rather than threats, it fundamentally changes their worldview, and humans seem to be natural facilitators of this process." General, who had initially opposed the entire situation, spoke up from his position at the table. "Doctor, my own cubs have been transformed by this experience. They now speak basic phrases in 6 alien languages. They've developed problem-solving skills I've never seen in juveniles their age, and they've become more confident and socially adaptive than their siblings who remained in traditional nursery settings." "But what are the risks?" asked Minister, his crystalline form chiming with concern. "We're talking about fundamental changes to how we raise our young. What if there are negative consequences we haven't yet discovered?" Doctor had anticipated this question. "Minister, that's why I'm recommending a gradual expansion program. We identify humans with the appropriate temperament and training, we establish facilities on key worlds and stations, and we monitor the results carefully. This isn't about replacing traditional child-rearing practices. It's about offering an additional option for families who choose it." Elder was quiet for a long moment, studying the data displays. Finally, he spoke. "Doctor, if we were to implement such a program, how many humans do you estimate would be suitable for this type of work?" Doctor had spent considerable time researching human psychological profiles. "Based on Lieutenant Harrison's traits and my analysis of human behavioral patterns, I estimate that approximately 15 to 20% of humans would have the natural aptitude for. With proper training and support, this could increase to perhaps 30%. The numbers caused a stir among the assembled representatives. 30% of an entire species naturally suited for a role that could transform galactic cooperation. It was an unprecedented resource. "There's something else," Doctor continued. "The success of this program could have implications beyond. If humans can serve as bridges between species in nursery environments, they might also be effective in other areas: education, conflict resolution, cultural exchange. We might be looking at humans as natural facilitators." Prime Vex's expression had shifted from skeptical interest to something approaching amazement. "Doctor, are you suggesting that humanity's role in the galactic community might be fundamentally different from what we originally assumed?" I'm suggesting that humanity might possess traits that make us uniquely valuable as peacekeepers and facilitators, not through military strength or technological advancement, but through our ability to help other species understand and cooperate with each other. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Through the reinforced windows, they could see into the nursery complex where Lieutenant Harrison was leading what appeared to be a song circle, with cubs from a dozen species making various sounds in a surprisingly harmonious pattern. Elder made a decision that would reshape the galaxy. Doctor, you will lead a task force to develop the framework for expanding this program. We want facilities established in every major sector, staffed by carefully selected and trained humans. The Galactic Council is prepared to provide unlimited resources for this project. But sir, Doctor protested, we're talking about a massive undertaking. The training programs alone would take years to develop. Doctor, Prime Vex said, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic authority. We are talking about the first real hope for lasting peace this galaxy has seen in 10,000 years. There is no resource we would not provide, no effort we would not make to see this succeed. As the meeting concluded and representatives dispersed to begin the massive task of reorganizing Galactic, Doctor found herself back at the observation window, watching Lieutenant Harrison as he helped the cubs settle down for their afternoon rest period. Did you ever imagine, asked Ambassador, who had remained beside her, that one missing cub's alert would lead to this? Doctor smiled, watching as Harrison gently adjusted a blanket around a sleeping crystalline youngling, while simultaneously humming a lullaby that seemed to soothe cubs from multiple species. You know what the really amazing part is? She said. I don't think Lieutenant Harrison realizes he's started a revolution. He's just doing what comes naturally to him, taking care of children who need comfort and safety. The fact that it's changing the entire structure of galactic civilization is just a bonus. On the other side of the transparent aluminum, Lieutenant Harrison looked up and caught sight of them watching. He smiled and gave a small wave, careful not to disturb the sleeping cubs draped across his arms. In that simple gesture, Doctor could see the future of the galaxy, not one shaped by military might or political maneuvering, but by the fundamental human understanding that all children, regardless of species, deserved love, care, and the chance to grow up knowing that the universe was full of friends they just hadn't met yet. The transformation had begun with 23 missing cubs and one confused human soldier. It would end with the first true galactic peace in recorded history, built on the foundation of humanity's greatest strength, their instinct to nurture and protect the innocent, no matter where they came from among the stars.